Sometimes the scariest sounds are the ones no one hears, but you. That was what stuck with me, long after we packed up and left the old farmhouse, long after we uploaded the files and stored the equipment away. I have been a paranormal investigator for over a decade, and in that time I have seen cold spots, shadows that dart across the walls, doors that open on their own, and voices that come through static like whispers from another world. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has haunted me like the screams from that house in Pine Hollow. It started like any other case. A woman had inherited the farmhouse from a distant uncle she had never met. She wanted to sell it, but strange things kept happening during the renovation. Tools went missing. Workers refused to come back. One man said he heard crying from inside the walls. Another said he saw a small figure watching him from the basement stairs. So she called us. Our team of 4 arrived just after sunset with cameras, EVP recorders, thermal sensors, and a sense of tired confidence. The place was cold and empty, and we split up to begin the sweep. At first it was the usual stuff, a few odd temperature readings, some light movement picked up on the motion cams, but nothing major. We recorded some faint static near the upstairs bedroom and a soft tapping from under the floorboards, but that could have been rodents. Around midnight, we gathered in the living room to review the early audio. That was when we first heard it, a long stretched out scream that rose and fell like something in agony. It came from one of the recorders we had left in the basement, but none of us had heard it live. It was not feedback, it was not wind. It was clear and sharp, like someone being torn apart. We looked at each other in silence. Then we played the next file. Another scream. This time louder. Then again, different pitch, but the same pain, the same terror. They did not match any of our voices, and we were not anywhere near the basement when they were recorded. I remember the look on Sam's face. He is the skeptic of the group, always trying to debunk everything, but even he looked pale. We decided to go down there right then, together. The basement was cold, dry, and empty. We checked every inch. The walls were old brick, and the floor was concrete. Nothing looked out of place until we noticed the far corner. The wall there looked newer, slightly different in color, as if it had been rebuilt or patched up more recently than the rest. When we tapped it, the sound was different, hollow. There was something behind it. We debated whether we should open it, but the feeling in that room was getting worse. It felt like the air was pressing against our chests, like something was waiting for us to find it. So we started removing the bricks, one by one, using a hammer and chisel. Behind the wall was a small dark crawl space, no bigger than a doghouse. It was filled with dust, cobwebs, and something else, a tiny pair of children's shoes, worn down to the soles. Beside them, a small piece of ribbon, and a lock of golden hair, tied neatly with a red thread. The moment we uncovered the crawl space, the screaming stopped. Did not notice it right away, because it had only been in the recordings. But when we played the recorders again, there was nothing, total silence. No more screams, just dead air. The cold in the room lifted slightly. Something had changed. We packed up in silence, each of us unsettled in a way we could not explain. Later, when we researched the house's history, we found a record of a missing child from the 1960s, a little girl who had disappeared during a family visit to the farm. The case had gone cold. The uncle who had owned the house never spoke about it. Some rumors said he was strange, isolated, not right in the head. There was never any proof, just whispers. But what we found behind that wall matched the missing girl's description exactly. We turned the evidence over to the authorities. They took it seriously. A forensic team came in. Bones were found deeper in the crawl space, small and fragile. A child's bones. The DNA confirmed it. The case was finally closed, but the answer was worse than the mystery. The girl had been hidden away, bricked in and forgotten, left to die in the dark, and all these years later, something of her had stayed behind. Her pain, her fear, her scream. I think she just wanted someone to know, someone to listen, and that is what haunts me most, that we almost walked away, that her voice might have gone unheard forever. Now when I listen to static, when I hear a whisper on the edge of sound, I wonder how many others are waiting in the silence, waiting for someone to hear them, waiting to be found. Not all dolls are toys. Some are cages. That was what the old woman whispered to us just before we entered the house. She was the one who called us in, saying her granddaughter's doll was cursed, that it had ruined their family, and needed to be taken away before it did something worse. Most of our team thought she was just scared, maybe confused, but the story was strange enough to catch our attention. The house was old, worn, and filled with dust and silence. The doll sat in the middle of the living room, on a child's rocking chair. It was porcelain, with faded blue eyes and blonde curls, dressed in a tiny red dress. Its face was cracked slightly on one side, like it had fallen before. The grandmother claimed it moved on its own, smiled when no one was looking, and once even turned its head to follow her. She said it belonged to her granddaughter, Lily, who had started speaking in a voice that was not her own after playing with it. The girl was now in a hospital, silent and withdrawn, refusing to speak or eat. She had clawed at her own neck, repeating only one phrase, "She wants to stay with me." We set up cameras around the house and stayed overnight. Nothing happened for hours. The footage showed the doll sitting still, lifeless, and we began to think it was just another case of paranoia. Then at exactly 3:12 a.m., the chair began to rock, slowly back and forth. No one was in the room. The temperature sensor picked up a sudden drop, and the audio recorder captured a strange whispering sound, so low and fast we had to slow it down later to hear it clearly. It was a child's voice, repeating the word "mine" over and over again. When we reviewed the footage the next morning, we saw something else. The doll's head had moved slightly between frames, just a tilt, like it was listening. But the most disturbing part was its face. The expression had changed, not completely, but just enough to notice. The mouth, once a simple painted smile, now looked tighter, more like a smirk. The eyes somehow seemed narrower. I cannot explain how porcelain can look angry, but it did. One of our team members, Rachel, offered to take the doll back with her for further testing. She had handled haunted objects before and believed she could isolate any energy attached to it. We all agreed, mostly because we wanted the house cleared, and Rachel seemed confident. She packed the doll carefully in a sealed container and left. That night, she called me just after 4 a.m. Her voice was shaking. She said she woke up with the feeling of something crawling over her chest, pressing down. When she turned on the light, the container was still shut, but she found fresh bite marks on her arms, small, deep, almost like a child had sunk their teeth into her skin. She swore she had locked everything. The doll had not moved, but something had changed. She said she felt watched, like something was just outside her vision, waiting for her to close her eyes again. We brought her back the next day. The marks were real, red and swollen, like something had broken the skin. We checked the footage from her apartment's cameras, and 3:12 a.m., the lights flickered, and for a split second, the camera caught a blur moving across the room, heading toward her bed. Then static. We never saw it clearly, but it looked small, almost childlike, crawling low to the ground. That was enough. We called in a specialist, someone who had dealt with similar cases. He told us the doll was likely a vessel, a kind of anchor for a spirit that had latched onto the child and then stayed behind. He said some spirits do not want release, some want control. He told us to bury it in a box lined with salt and wrapped in white cloth, then seal it far away from people. We did exactly that. We took the doll to a remote wooded area, buried it deep, and said a prayer. The air felt lighter afterward. Rachel slowly recovered. Her marks faded. The strange dream stopped. We thought it was over. 2 weeks later, the grandmother called again. She said her granddaughter had started speaking, not crying, not screaming, just whispering quietly to herself. When asked what she was saying, she answered, "She is back." We checked the burial site. It was untouched. The soil was still packed. The box was still there, but when we opened it to make sure, the doll was gone. Only the red dress remained, folded neatly where the doll had been. We never found it again. We never found out how it got out, but sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I hear that same whisper we caught on tape, "Mine, mine, mine," and I think about the girl, about Rachel, about that cracked little face watching us from behind the glass. Not all dolls are toys. Some are cages, and some are keys to something that never wanted to be found in the first place. Some things are meant to stay forgotten, but they always find a way to speak. Those were the words written in the journal of a member of our team, a paranormal investigator named Ben. Just days before his tragic death, Ben had been one of the best in our field. We were reviewing EVP recordings from an investigation at an old abandoned hotel, one with a history of death and despair, and I will never forget that night. We had just finished our interviews and had gathered all the audio evidence we could, hoping for something useful, something that would help us understand the strange occurrences reported by the local townspeople. The investigation itself had been uneventful, at least on the surface, but as we sat down to review the recordings, something started to feel wrong. The usual static of the tapes began to warp, slowly at first, like the sound was being smothered by something deeper. As we adjusted the volume, we noticed something unusual. On one of the live EVP channels, static began to form in real time on the monitor. It was subtle at first, just a flicker here and there, but as we focused on it, the flicker began to grow into something more distinct. The static shifted, swirling, and slowly, the outline of a man began to take shape, a figure standing perfectly still, dressed in a suit. At first we thought it was just a glitch, maybe a malfunction in the equipment, but then the figure moved. It tilted its head, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The air grew heavier, the room colder. Then something even stranger happened. The man in the static began to speak. It was a soft whisper at first, barely audible, but then his voice grew louder, clearer, and more distinct. He started to name each one of us, one by one. My heart stopped when he said my name, Sarah. It sent a cold shiver through my body, but I told myself it was a trick of the sound system, some sort of delay or malfunction. But when he said Mark and Emily, the others in the room with me, the panic started to creep in. These were our names, names we had not spoken aloud since starting the investigation. But the voice didn't stop there. It continued. It named each of us, repeating our names like an eerie litany, until finally, it came to Ben. Ben, who had been with us just a few days earlier, but who was now dead. His death had been sudden, a car accident that left us all stunned and grieving. When the figure on the screen spoke his name, it sent a jolt of horror through me. Ben was dead. There was no way he could be here. No way his name should have been spoken. Then the voice did something even more terrifying. It began to laugh. The sound was hollow, distant, and full of malice. It wasn't a human laugh, not really. It felt wrong, like the laughter of something that should not exist. My fingers trembled as I reached for the pause button, but I couldn't bring myself to stop it. I was frozen in place, unable to look away. The figure in the static didn't move. It just stood there, a dark, shapeless silhouette, while its voice echoed in the room, mocking us. Each name it spoke was followed by that chilling laugh, growing louder with each repetition. It was as if the figure was toying with us, using our grief against us. It knew our fears, knew our weaknesses, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the laughter stopped. The figure vanished into the static, leaving only the lingering echo of its voice in the room. The room was deathly quiet after that, and we all sat there, too scared to speak, too terrified to acknowledge what had just happened. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank, some kind of elaborate hoax, but the more we listened to the recording, the more certain we became that this was no trick. The voice had sounded too real, too distinct. The way it had named Ben was especially unnerving. No one else knew the details of our investigation, not the team members, not even the local townspeople. We hadn't shared any personal information, yet the voice knew everything. But what really broke me was the final thing the figure said. It wasn't a name, it was a command. Leave now. The words were clear, spoken with an authority that sent a cold wave of dread through my chest. I glanced around the room at the others. They were all visibly shaken, their faces pale, and their eyes wide with fear. No one moved. We couldn't. We had to figure out what was happening. But then I noticed something else on the footage. In the corner of the screen, behind the static, there was a brief flash of movement, a shadow, just a split second, but it was enough to make my heart race, and it was moving toward us. The figure wasn't confined to the screen. It was here. We decided to leave immediately. There was no reasoning with it, no understanding what had just happened. We packed up our equipment and made our way to the door. But as we passed the entryway, the air grew even colder. I could feel it. Something watching us, something waiting for us to leave. We walked out of that house, never looking back, but the feeling didn't leave. The voices still haunt my mind at night. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them again. The names, the laughter, the command. And sometimes when I'm alone, I feel the weight of those cold, invisible eyes on me, just beyond the edge of my vision. That night, we thought we had escaped whatever we had awakened, but I don't think it's done with us. Not yet. The figure in the static spoke our names for a reason. It knew us, and it still knows us. I think it's waiting for us to return, but this time, I'm not sure we'll make it out alive. Sometimes the dead do not rest where we think they do. These were the words spoken by our team leader David, after we had experienced something truly unimaginable during an investigation at an abandoned graveyard. It was an old, forgotten place, tucked away at the edge of town, hidden from sight by overgrown trees and a long-forgotten path. The locals had told us stories, strange ones, about the place. They said it was haunted by children who had died under mysterious circumstances many years ago. Some even claimed to hear laughter and footsteps late at night, but no one had dared to investigate in years. When we arrived, the air was thick with a strange unease. The ground was soft beneath our feet, and the gravestones were cracked, worn, and tilted at odd angles, like forgotten sentinels standing watch over the past. It was the kind of place where you could feel the weight of history pressing down on you, heavy and suffocating. We set up our equipment, our thermal cameras, EVP recorders, and motion sensors, all eager to capture whatever strange happenings this forsaken place might hold. But the most unnerving part of the graveyard was the old stone well sitting near the center. It was dry, cracked, and half collapsed, but there was something about it that drew us in. It looked like the kind of place where something could easily be hidden, where forgotten things could be buried, and forgotten voices could linger. As night fell, the air grew colder, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, and the wind howled through the trees, creating eerie whispers that made us all uneasy. We began our investigation, moving from gravestone to gravestone, calling out to whatever spirits might be present. But as we gathered near the well, we heard something that made us stop in our tracks. It was faint at first, almost like a distant echo, but then it became clearer. We could hear the sound of children's voices, laughter, singing, and soft murmurs, all coming from the direction of the well. No one could see anything, but the sounds were unmistakable. We tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was the wind, or an animal, but as we listened more closely, we realized the voices were too distinct, too human, to be dismissed. There was something strange about them, though. They sounded too alive, too vivid for a place that had been abandoned for so long. It was as if the voices were coming from just beneath the surface, beckoning us closer. We set up a thermal camera and lowered it down into the well, hoping to capture something, anything, that might explain what was happening. As the camera descended into the darkness, we stared at the screen, waiting for the familiar heat signatures of any animals or humans. But what we saw next made our blood run cold. At first, it was just darkness, but then small, faint figures began to appear on the monitor. They were tiny, barely visible at first, but then they grew clearer. Figures of children, hunched over, peeking out from the darkness, at the bottom of the well. Their faces were hard to make out, but their shapes were unmistakable. There were at least 4 or 5 of them, standing just out of the reach of the camera's light, watching us. But there was something deeply wrong about them. They didn't seem like normal children. They were too still, too silent. Their forms were flickering in and out, like they were not entirely part of this world. We all froze, staring at the screen, not believing what we were seeing. We raised the camera, desperate to pull it back up and out of that hellish darkness, but the figures did not vanish. They remained, peering at us from the depths, their eyes locked onto the camera, as if they could see us too. The laughter from earlier began again, faint at first, but then louder, more frantic, as if the children were getting closer, trying to climb out of the well. We could hear the sounds of footsteps too, echoing off the stone walls, but when we turned to look at the well, it remained still and empty. There was no movement, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. Our hearts were racing, and our breath was shallow, as we tried to make sense of what we had just witnessed. We lowered the camera back down again, determined to capture more evidence of whatever was in the well. But when we looked at the screen again, the figures were gone. The well was empty, silent. There was nothing there. We didn't know what to think. Our minds were reeling. We had all heard the voices, seen the figures on the thermal camera, and yet when we looked with our own eyes, the well was empty. Our equipment had captured something undeniable, but we couldn't explain it. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or the camera malfunctioning. But deep down, we knew that what we had seen was something far darker, something we could not explain. We decided to leave, but as we gathered our things and started to walk away, the air grew heavier. The sound of children's laughter followed us, echoing in the distance, growing fainter as we moved further from the well. But even as we left the graveyard, the feeling that something was watching us, following us, never left. It was like the children were still there, just out of sight, waiting for us to return. And to this day, I can still hear their voices sometimes, in the dead of night, faint whispers in the darkness. Sometimes, the dead do not rest where we think they do, and sometimes, they don't want to be forgotten. Sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried. Those were the words I thought about every night. Long after we had left the old asylum, it had been a routine investigation, like so many others, but something about this place felt different. The air was thick with a heaviness that no one could shake, and the rooms echoed with the distant whispers of the past. We were a small team of paranormal investigators, trained to handle the unexplainable, but even we couldn't deny the strange presence that seemed to haunt the asylum. We spent hours there, collecting evidence, listening for voices, and trying to communicate with whatever spirits might be lingering in the building. There were shadows that darted in the corners of our eyes, faint whispers on the air, and cold spots that seemed to follow us. But what disturbed me the most was the shadow. It wasn't like the others. This one felt alive, like it was waiting for something, waiting for me. We finally wrapped up the investigation and left, not knowing that what we had uncovered would follow me home. At first, it was subtle. I didn't think much of it when the lights in my apartment began to flicker. It happened once or twice, and I just chalked it up to faulty wiring. But then it started happening more frequently, always at night. The lights would flicker, the air would grow cold, and I would feel like I wasn't alone, like someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew stronger. I would be sitting in my living room, watching TV, when I would see it, the shadow. It would linger at the edge of my vision, just out of sight, but I could feel it, creeping closer, drawing nearer. I'd turn around, heart pounding, but there would be nothing there. The first time I saw it clearly was when I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom. I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror, just behind me. It was tall, dark, and for a moment, I could have sworn it was standing right there in the reflection, watching me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. The bathroom was empty. I laughed it off as my mind playing tricks on me, but that was just the beginning. As the days passed, the shadow grew bolder, the flickering lights became more intense, and the whispers started again. I would hear them when I was alone, soft murmurs just out of reach. They sounded like voices, distant and muffled, but they would never make sense. It was like they were speaking a language I couldn't understand. One night, I was sitting on my couch, trying to distract myself with a book, when I heard a loud crack. I looked up, and the mirror on the wall was shattered. No explanation, no reason for it. It was as if the glass had simply cracked on its own, splitting down the center in jagged lines. I ran my hand over the broken pieces, feeling the sharp edges, and that's when I saw it again. The shadow was standing in the hallway, just at the edge of the living room. It was more defined this time, its outline sharp and dark, its form looming over me. It didn't move, but I could feel its presence, suffocating and cold. I stood frozen, too terrified to even breathe, until the shadow finally dissipated, vanishing like smoke. But that wasn't the end. No, it only got worse after that. The next few nights were a blur of terror. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the shadow hovering near me, lurking in the darkness. I would wake up to the sound of whispers in my ears, low and unintelligible, and when I looked around, there was no one there. The lights would flicker again, the temperature would drop, and the feeling of being watched never left. It was like the shadow had followed me home, and now it was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each passing night. My friends and family noticed something was wrong. I became distant, afraid to be alone in my own apartment. My once peaceful space had turned into a prison, and I didn't know how to escape. But then, after one particularly restless night, I remembered something I had forgotten about during the investigation. The asylum. I recalled the rooms where we had felt that strange energy, the dark corners where I had felt the presence of something sinister. I remembered the shadow that had haunted me there too, watching from the farthest reaches of the building, as if waiting for me. It hit me then. Maybe the shadow hadn't just been a part of the asylum. Maybe it had attached itself to me. That thought terrified me more than anything else. I couldn't escape it. No matter how far I went, the shadow was there. That night, I did something I never thought I would do. I grabbed my gear, got in my car, and drove back to the asylum. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I felt like I had to face whatever it was head on. As I entered the crumbling building once more, the air felt different. The darkness felt heavier. I made my way to the room where we had captured some of the most unsettling footage. the room where I had first felt the shadow. I stood there in the silence, the weight of the past pressing down on me, and I spoke aloud, words that I never thought I would utter. I apologized. I apologized to whatever entity I had disturbed, whatever spirit or force had attached itself to me. I didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but it was the only thing I could think of. As soon as I spoke the words, the temperature in the room seemed to shift, the oppressive weight lifted, and the air became still. I waited for a moment, unsure if anything would happen, but then I felt it, a subtle release, like the shadow had finally been released from me. The whispers stopped, the lights stopped flickering, and for the first time in weeks, I felt safe. I returned home that night, and to my relief, the shadow did not follow me. The lights remained steady, the whispers were gone, and the oppressive presence had vanished. The nightmare had ended, but every now and then, when the lights flicker or the air grows cold, I remember the shadow, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to make the same mistake I did. Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, and some shadows are never truly gone.